Greetings, class. Today we want to talk about capitalism and socialism. I will start with the topic of capitalism first. Secondly, I will explain socialism and then conclude today with why they don't work together. Let's start with capitalism. Capitalism, like socialism, has its roots in the dramatic economic and social changes of the Industrial Revolution. Emerging strongly in the 18th and 19th centuries, capitalism emphasized private ownership, individual freedom, and market-driven economic activities. Unlike socialism, capitalism places its faith in free markets to allocate resources efficiently, driven by competition, profit incentives, and minimal government interference. Adam Smith, often considered the father of capitalism, laid the foundational concepts in his influential work, The Wealth of Nations, 1776. Smith advocated for laissez-faire economics, arguing that the invisible hand of market forces naturally guides economic activity toward optimal efficiency and growth. Capitalism became synonymous with rapid industrialization, technological innovation, and the development of robust financial systems. The spread of socialism emerged in the shadow of the Industrial Revolution, a response to the dramatic inequalities and harsh living conditions created by burgeoning industrial capitalism in the 18th and 19th centuries. As factories multiplied, labor conditions deteriorated, and stark disparities between the rich industrialists and impoverished workers intensified. Thinkers began to envision alternatives to such exploitation, marking the genesis of socialism. Throughout the 20th century, capitalism faced numerous challenges and adaptations. The Great Depression of the 1930s starkly highlighted capitalism's vulnerabilities, leading to significant reforms under economic theorists like John Maynard Keynes. Keynesian economics advocated government intervention to stabilize markets, manage unemployment, and foster economic growth, significantly influencing capitalist economies. The post-World War II era saw capitalism diversify into various forms. The United States championed free market capitalism, characterized by minimal state intervention, while European nations embraced welfare capitalism, blending market economies with extensive social programs. East Asian economies, notably Japan and later South Korea, adopted forms of state-directed capitalism, combining private enterprise with strategic government guidance. The late 20th century brought neoliberalism, a renewed emphasis on deregulation, privatization, and reduced government involvement in the economy. Influential leaders, such as Ronald Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher in the UK, implemented policies reflecting this philosophy, shaping contemporary global capitalism. Critics of capitalism argue it leads to income inequality, exploitation, and environmental degradation. They point out that capitalism's relentless pursuit of profit can overlook social responsibilities, labor rights, and sustainable practices. Conversely, proponents highlight capitalism's unparalleled ability to generate wealth, drive innovation, and lift populations out of poverty. Today, capitalism continues evolving, shaped by globalization, technological advances, and increasing awareness of social and environmental responsibilities. The interplay between free markets and regulatory frameworks remains central to contemporary economic debates, reflecting ongoing efforts to balance economic growth with social equity and environmental sustainability. Market-based, relying on supply and demand dynamics. Entrepreneurs and businesses compete to maximize profits, incentivizing efficiency, innovation, and technological advancement. Prices in a capitalist system are determined by market interactions rather than by central planning, allowing rapid adaptation to consumer preferences and economic conditions. Now, let's look at socialism. Socialism emerged in the shadow of the Industrial Revolution, a response to the dramatic inequalities and harsh living conditions created by burgeoning industrial capitalism in the 18th and 19th centuries. As factories multiplied, labor conditions deteriorated, and stark disparities between the rich industrialists and impoverished workers intensified. Thinkers began to envision alternatives to such exploitation, marking the genesis of socialism. Initially, idealistic figures known as utopian socialists like Robert Owen and Charles Fourier envisioned communities founded on cooperation and shared ownership. Their ideas, though noble, were criticized as overly optimistic and disconnected from practical realities. Nevertheless, these visions laid important philosophical groundwork. In 1917, socialism dramatically reshaped global politics when Vladimir Lenin led the Bolsheviks in the Russian Revolution, establishing the Soviet Union, the first socialist state structured on Marxist-Leninist principles. Under Lenin and subsequently Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union implemented a centrally planned economy, with the government controlling production, distribution, and prices. This form of socialism, however, was criticized for stifling individual freedoms and creating economic inefficiencies. After World War II, socialism diversified significantly. Western Europe developed democratic socialism, or social democracy, blending capitalism with strong social welfare systems. Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Norway became renowned for balancing market competition with extensive welfare programs providing healthcare, education, and social security. Conversely, Eastern Europe, influenced by Soviet dominance, adopted centralized economic planning and authoritarian governance. Similarly, in 1949, China established a communist regime, initially emulating Soviet central planning, but eventually shifting toward market-oriented socialism in the late 20th century under Deng Xiaoping's reforms. The late 20th century saw the collapse of the Soviet Union and its Eastern European satellites, prompting a global reassessment of socialism. Many countries transitioned towards more market-oriented economies, highlighting the challenges of rigid central planning. However, the fundamental values of socialism, equity, cooperation, and collective welfare continued to influence global political discourse. Socialism interacts with markets differently, depending on its form. In centrally planned economies like the Soviet Union, the government managed all economic activities, limiting competitive market forces. Conversely, democratic socialist nations like Sweden embraced mixed economies, retaining market competition while ensuring robust public services and social welfare. Market socialism, practiced historically in nations such as Yugoslavia, presented yet another variation, allowing market mechanisms to allocate resources within collectively owned enterprises. Despite its variations, socialism consistently aims to reduce inequalities, combat poverty, and promote social cohesion. Its critics, however, highlight potential drawbacks, such as reduced incentives for innovation, inefficiencies from centralized planning, and possible infringement on personal freedoms. Thus, socialism remains a dynamic and evolving ideology, shaped by historical contexts and diverse global implementations. Its core principles of equity, communal ownership, and societal well-being continue to resonate, influencing contemporary debates and policies worldwide. Socialism took a more structured turn in the mid-19th century when Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels introduced a scientific approach through their seminal works, notably the Communist Manifesto, 1848, and Das Kapital, 1867. Marx and Engels argued that capitalism inherently creates class struggles between the proletariat, the working class, and the bourgeoisie, who own production means. They envisioned an eventual proletariat revolution, leading to socialism and eventually communism, characterized by collective ownership and equitable wealth distribution. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw socialist political movements grow throughout Europe, including countries like Germany, France, and Scandinavia. Many advocated for democratic reforms rather than violent revolution, aiming to achieve socialism incrementally through political participation and democratic processes. Finally, let's look at why these ideas are not compatible. Capitalism and socialism, at their core, represent fundamentally different visions for organizing society and its economy, making them inherently incompatible. Capitalism is built around private ownership and individual freedom. In a capitalist system, businesses and resources are primarily owned by private individuals or corporations. Decisions about production, pricing, and distribution are largely left to the free market, shaped by supply and demand. This creates an environment where competition thrives, innovation is rewarded, and profits serve as a powerful motivator. Under capitalism, success and failure hinge on individual decisions, effort, and creativity.